Shabbat Shalom, everyone. All right, right before I began to record this sermon, I was filling out some footnotes in the final editing process of my book, and I found this wonderful gem from the Babylonian Talmud, from Baba Kama, page 82a. And it said that Ezra the scribe, according to the sages, instituted 10 different rules. Now, I'm not going to quote all 10 because they get very interesting. If you ever want me to teach a class on it, I'm more than happy to have the discussions, but I'm not sticking it in this sermon. But the fourth one is my favorite, and that is on Erev Shabbat. We are required to eat garlic. Yes, just when you thought there were not enough rules about dietary policy in the Jewish world, you have to eat garlic. Now, this tells me, of course, that Ezra is one of the great wise personages in Jewish history because, need I say more? Garlic. But I'm going to leave the laughter in and not edit it out. I absolutely love that passage, but I have to laugh a little bit because it is Parashat Shmini. In the third triennial cycle, we are reading the passages about Kashrut, or the derivation of Kashrut in the Torah. The very famous passages on if you eat land animals, sorry vegans for this discussion, then it has to be animals that have cloven hooves and chew their cud. If you eat fish, they have to have fishes, and fish should have fishes. They have to have scales and fins. And then there's the things that we wouldn't want to eat anyway, like scavengers and birds of prey and that sort of thing. But I bring it up, the amusement of adding yet another rule to Kashrut as well as this particular passage in the Torah, because if we are being honest with ourselves outside of the Orthodox world, this is one of the things that will cause a congregation to erupt more than just about anything else. Try to change a Reform congregation's food policy. Not even a kashrut policy, but a food policy. I wrote down in a journal, this is many, many years ago, way before I went to rabbinical school. I was on a committee that was dealing with a food policy. And on the day that we were going to take the vote, someone had come in. It was actually, many people had come in. It was the largest attended meeting ever in the history of that committee in that particular synagogue. And I remember the quote of one person that was, "How dare you tell me what I can and can't eat?" Which at the time I found shocking and didn't have a reply for it. I didn't even know how to think. I was so shocked by what I was hearing. And I remember thinking, I'm not coming to your house. I'm not even going out to your car. If you really desperately need a ham sandwich, please, I'm not stopping you from eating it. I don't think anyone here is. But I've seen this reaction grow to people leaving synagogues because of discussions on food policies. And I guess that's my first question. It's not the direction I ultimately am going to go with this sermon today. But I want to ask the question on why do you think it is that people are so passionate about dietary regulations in the synagogue? Just a few thoughts that I was going to originally bring into the longer version of this sermon. We are subject to dietary regulations much more powerful than what a synagogue can put over us and what health and safety committees at the governmental level can impose on us. What's on our grocery store shelves has to do with what in the United States the FDA allows to be there. And what is allowed to be there is also for reacting against the arbitrary nature of religious food ideas on occasion. Well, Gen Xers, do you remember the food pyramid? Right? That came from lobbyist groups. It had nothing to do with health. So we are subject to a lot of these sorts of things, and tying into thousands of years of tradition for the sake of a house of worship that then doesn't expand outside of that as far as rules is something that I find sensible. But if there is another discussion to be had, then let's have that discussion. I'm more than happy to open it up. But because of the extreme reactions that we have when authority is imposed on us, I want to take this a completely different direction and a completely different meditation, because as much as I am loving to think that we need to add the requirement to eat garlic on Erev Shabbat as part of our kosher rules, I think there's a more interesting question to struggle with. And this actually comes from I shouldn't have wasted my time doing this, but I followed a long Twitter discussion a few weeks ago between two people that I vaguely know, and they are actually friends and acquaintances with each other, and I'm not sure that they are anymore. Essentially what happened is something that politically had happened in the United States had upset one of them, and so one of them posted something, and then the other posted against it, and then they started acting incredibly emotionally in the moment and posting things that were non-verifiable, and so someone would post something, the other would call them out for it, and then post the information that showed that was untrue, and then that person would then post something that was not rational, and the other person would post how that was untrue. And then at some point, both of them also had made claims that they hadn't said what they clearly said just a few screams of Twitter back. And the moment that just closed it down for me was when one of the people then a few days later, clearly still as part of this dialogue, had posted how do you know if you're being gaslit? After both of them had just been gaslighting each other for many, many tweets with hundreds of people actually sitting back as an audience. And it reminds me of the Yorbo people's analog to the golden rule, and that is before you go and take a pointy stick and poke it at a small bird, first let someone point that pointy stick at you. I think that we can agree with basic ethical rules. We want to treat others the way that we want to be treated. But when we look at our reaction against someone imposing authority on us, I don't know if as often we engage in that question of how we ourselves impose that on others that we are acting against. So, for example, one of the things that we are learning is we are strengthening our ability to stand up for ourselves and our relationships. And this is every human being needs the strength to be able to stand up, because every human being treats other human beings poorly, and every human being is treated poorly by other human beings. It just is part of the makeup of who we are, regardless of what group we belong to. And so we can learn great tools such as setting boundaries. The question is when we set boundaries for others, do we respect the boundaries of others? If we react against a synagogue's Kashrut policy, do we, when people come to our house, require them to not bring certain types of foods? When we go to a restaurant, do we set very clear limits on what we can be served or not? What I'm trying to say is, I think that there's actually a feature involved here instead of a bug when it comes to our very strong reaction. Just like today, how many people, and this was when I was a rabbi in England, this one was hilarious because this was not just the Reform community, this was also the Orthodox community. There was actually something called holiday meats, and this was such a common part of the minhag, of the local tradition, that it was just considered normative that we have strong boundaries for what we eat, but when we go on vacation, we eat holiday meats. And that meant treif, and it was just the excuse that was brought into the world. And I can definitely imagine, you go back far enough, there was definitely a point where, yes, okay, we can all agree that we're not going to eat crow, but on the other hand, really, you're not going to let us have our BLTs. I think that the feature of something that was bound to make people mad in the same way that it does today is so that we can become aware of why are we getting mad when something is imposed on us for the sole purpose. It's the only way that we can be made conscious of the boundaries that we set on others that we do not allow to be set on ourselves. I know that this is a little bit complicated and a little bit difficult, and it certainly is for me. And thinking these thoughts has been a challenging one for me this week because there are certain rules that I don't want to follow. But it's bigger than that. It is when certain rules are applied to me by persons or places or groups or entities, there are certain rules that I become disproportionately incensed that those are being applied to me. And that's the idea that I think is being teased out. I generally think that most of us, not all of us, but most of us are going to agree that rules and regulations, chukim u'mishpatim, are required for functioning civil society, and that if we actually removed all rules and had the anarchist no state, that would last about one day until Vladimir Putin would come and decide to become the strongman, just like every other time that any anarchic system has happened in history, that is filled, the void is filled by the person with the biggest guns in no time at all. So I think most of us agree that rules need to be there, but the meditation here that I think comes from our reaction against things like kashrut or the other things that we find arbitrary or difficult within the tradition is the awareness of how upset we just got at that. And yeah, I'm obviously talking about other things. I'm talking about the meditation on how we react with mask mandates, how we react with vaccine mandates, all these things that right and left, back and forth are being debated in the country that I'm living and the other countries of people who watch these videos. I'm old enough to remember when seatbelt laws became the thing in the States, and gee, the exact same discussions happened. I get it. We don't like anyone taking away our sense of freedom, but I think it's deeper than that, because we don't react equally negatively to every bit of authority that's imposed on us. Most of it passes us by and we don't even notice. But when we react so extremely to something, that's the moment where the universe is communicating with us. Why that thing? And then once we start figuring that out, then going that next level and saying, how am I doing this to someone else? Those are hard questions that are going to lead us to some pretty amazing truths. And so I'll go ahead and leave it at that. I'm going to go and put on dinner right now, and you can guess just how kosher I'm going to be. I'm going to use a lot of garlic, and I recommend you do the same thing. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll see you next time.